I found my son, an architect, reduced to a ghost in the palace I built for him, his spirit crushed by the in-laws his wife invited. The ultimate betrayal was revealed on an 8-page credit card statement, forcing me to deliver a final, unappealable judgment on her loyalty and secure the property with the quiet clang of a wrought iron gate. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. There's a language in the bones of a well-built house. It speaks of integrity, of strength, of a foundation laid not just with concrete, but with intention. I've spent my life learning that language, first as a young woman with the hammer in her hand, and later as the head of Washington Crest, an empire I built from the southern clay with my own 2 hands. The country house, the one nestled in 200 acres of rolling hills, was more than a structure. It was a poem. I built it with my son, Andre, in my mind, knowing where the morning sun would hit the breakfast nook because he loved to sketch in the early light. The wide, welcoming porch was made for him, a gentle soul who found peace in the quiet hum of the cicadas at dusk. It was a testament to my love for him, a solid, tangible foundation for the life I knew he deserved. The first few months after he and his wife, Simone, moved in were a portrait of the very dream I'd held. When I'd visit, I'd find them on the porch swing, their laughter echoing in the evening air. Andre was happy, truly happy, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Simone, too, seemed to blossom there. She had a genuine talent for making a house a home, filling the rooms with warmth and life. She loved my son, and in that shared love, the house became a sanctuary. I had laid the foundation. The rest was up to them. I never imagined that Simone would in turn give it all away. The first tremor hit not with a bang, but with a carefully orchestrated, manipulative whimper. I was visiting them one Sunday, and we were sitting on the porch sipping iced tea when Simone's phone rang. The name Mama flashed on the screen, and Simone's serene expression immediately tightened. She walked to the far end of the porch for privacy, but the still country air carried the conversation, a slow, sad descent into a trap I could see as clearly as a faulty blueprint. "Oh, Mama, no," Simone murmured, her voice laced with concern. "Are you sure? But what did the landlord say?" I watched Andre. He set down his glass, the gentle clink on the wooden table a small, sad sound of defeat. He had heard this tone before. He knew what was coming. Simone's voice grew more earnest. "Don't cry, Mama. Please, we'll figure something out." "Of course you can, just for a little while until you're back on your feet." She ended the call, her shoulders slumped. She was preparing to defend a decision she had already made. "That was my mother," she announced, her eyes filled with tears and defensive resolve. "Her landlord is raising the rent again. She can't afford it. She's just so stressed." Then she delivered the blow. I told her she and Darnell could come stay with us, just for a couple of weeks, a month at most, until they can find a new place. A couple of weeks. I had run enough construction projects to know that a temporary solution, when poorly planned, becomes a permanent problem. Patty Powell and her layabout son, Darnell, were not a temporary problem. They were a foundational rot. Andre looked at his wife, his instinct always to keep the peace. He knew saying no would start a war. He didn't have the energy to fight. He looked at Simone's pleading, tear-streaked face, and he did what he always did. He capitulated. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet. "A couple of weeks. But Simone, we have to have clear boundaries." Simone's face flooded with relief. She rushed over and kissed him, a gesture of gratitude for his surrender. "Thank you, baby," she whispered. "You won't even know they're here. I promise." It was a promise she was in no position to keep. The iced tea in my glass was now warm and bitter, I said nothing. It was not my place. This was their home, their marriage, their decision. But I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The foundation was solid, but I knew with the certainty of a structural engineer looking at a hairline crack that the first tremor had just hit, and the storm was already moving in. My heart sank lower than the basement footing. I saw the surrender in my son's eyes and knew the price he was about to pay. They did not arrive like guests. They arrived like a conquering army. Their beat-up sedan groaned up the long gravel driveway 2 days later, a plume of exhaust smoke trailing behind it like a victory flag. Patty Powell, my daughter-in-law's mother, emerged from the passenger side, her face arranged in an expression of theatrical, tearful gratitude. Her son, Darnell, a man in his late 20s with the lazy, entitled posture of a teenager, slouched out of the driver's seat, a lit cigarette dangling from his lips. The invasion began immediately. "Oh, my baby girl," Patty wailed, enveloping Simone in a suffocating hug. "You have saved our lives. This place? It's a palace." Her eyes swept over the grand facade, not with awe, but with a kind of smug, proprietary satisfaction. This was not a temporary refuge. This was her new standard of living. Darnell, meanwhile, flicked his cigarette butt onto the pristine lawn, a small act of casual desecration that made my jaw lock. He looked at Andre, who was standing awkwardly on the porch, and gave him a lazy, familiar nod. "Sup, man," he said, as if Andre were a valet. "Where do you want this stuff?" The trunk was packed to the bursting point. For people staying only a couple of weeks, they had brought an astonishing amount of luggage. The quiet sanctuary Andre and Simone had built was shattered by the loud, grating frequency of the Powell clan. Patty immediately began a running commentary on the house. "Oh, this kitchen is beautiful, Simone," she said, her compliment laced with subtle criticism. "The backsplash is a little dated, but we can fix that. And these curtains, honey? No. We'll go shopping tomorrow and find something with a little more life." She was not a guest offering suggestions. She was a new homeowner making a punch list. Darnell made a beeline for the most comfortable sofa, flopped down with his feet on the coffee table, and immediately began surfing through the television channels with a loud, impatient clicking. He found a sports game, turned the volume up to a deafening level, and announced to the room at large, "Yo, what's the Wi-Fi password? The signal in here is weak." The promise of a couple of weeks felt like a sick joke before the first hour was even over. The house, I realized, was already tilting off its axis. That evening, Patty claimed the 2 main guest bedrooms as their own, dismissing Simone's attempts to set boundaries with a saccharine smile. Then Darnell made his official declaration of independence from the working world. "Yeah, I told my boss at the warehouse to stick it," he bragged, leaning against the doorframe of the master bedroom, a room he found perfectly acceptable to enter without an invitation. "I'm done with that dead-end gig. This place," he gestured vaguely at the beautiful home, "is the perfect spot to get my head right. No stress." Andre, who was standing beside me, flinched as if he'd been struck. The message was clear. Darnell was not here to get back on his feet. He was here to put his feet up permanently on my son's coffee table. Later that night, I found Andre in the garage, staring at the family SUV. "They just piled everything in the trunk," he whispered, his voice filled with dawning horror. "They brought coolers of frozen food, 6 large garbage bags of clothes, and 4 empty plastic totes. They're unpacking like they signed a 5-year lease." He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. "Did you see this coming?" I put my hand on his arm. "They're not guests, Andre," I said softly. "They're squatters. The invasion is complete. The siege has just begun." My builder's mind was already running structural calculations, trying to estimate the weight the foundation could bear. It wasn't the weight of their belongings that scared me. It was the corrosive weight of their entitlement. Andre stood there, defeated, his hand gripping the cold metal door of the SUV. He told me the gas tank was already a quarter tank emptier than it had been that morning. This was only the first visible expense, the first micro-theft. I saw a flash of anger cross his face, quickly replaced by resignation. He was already retreating, choosing to absorb the cost rather than fight. This is how they win, I thought, by making the price of peace higher than the price of war. The couple of weeks bled into a month, and the country house, once a sanctuary of peace and creativity, was transformed into a full-service, all-inclusive resort with a staff of one. My son, Andre, a man who had designed award-winning buildings, was reduced to the role of an unpaid concierge, butler, and chauffeur in his own home. The days took on a grim, predictable rhythm. Andre's mornings, once reserved for sketching and quiet contemplation, were shattered by the demands of his new housemates. He would come downstairs to find Patti sitting at the kitchen island, a queen holding court, waiting to be served. "Andre, honey," she'd call out, her voice a syrupy, manipulative coo. "Be a dear and make your mother-in-law a cup of that fancy coffee you like. The pods are just too confusing for me." Darnell, who rarely surfaced before noon, would then require transportation. "Yo, Dre, I need the keys to the SUV," he'd say, tossing a dirty shirt onto a chair. "Got to run into town." He never specified why he was going or when he would be back. Andre's car, the one he had saved years to buy, became Darnell's personal Uber, returning hours later with the gas tank on empty and a new collection of fast food wrappers littering the passenger seat. The physical toll was immediate. Andre became a ghost in his own home, a silent, weary servant trailing in their destructive wake. He'd clean the pool. He'd wash the dishes they left piled in the sink. He'd pick up the clothes they shed like a second skin. He did it all with a stoic resignation, his shoulders slumping a little lower with each passing day. He was trying to keep the peace, to avoid the confrontation he knew would shatter his wife. But the peace was a fiction, and he was the only one paying the price. The ultimate indignity, the moment that I knew would become a permanent scar tissue memory for him, came on a Friday afternoon. Patti, who had decided to host a small dinner party for some of her own friends the following evening, approached Andre in his studio. He was at his drafting table for the first time in weeks, trying to reclaim a small piece of his own life, his own passion. She did not knock. She simply walked in, a long, handwritten list in her hand. "Andre," she announced, her tone that of a busy executive delegating to an assistant. "I need you to run to the store for me. I'm making my famous gumbo tomorrow, and I need a few things." She handed him the list. It was not a list of a few things. It was a 3-page, single-spaced document detailing a complex and expensive array of ingredients: fresh Gulf shrimp, andouille sausage from a specific high-end deli, premium file powder, a particular brand of imported French bread. At the bottom, she had written in large underlined letters, "Get the good stuff, not that cheap Krudger brand." Andre stared at the list, his face a pale, blank mask of disbelief. She was not just asking him to run an errand. She was ordering him to provision a party for her friends in his house with his money, and she was dictating the quality of the ingredients as if he were a catering manager who might try to cut corners. He looked up from the list, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes, but Patti was already walking away, her mind on the next task. "And don't forget the wine," she called over her shoulder. "Something nice. A French Bordeaux, maybe." Andre stood there for a long time, the list clutched in his hand. His studio felt suddenly cold, the blueprints on the table mocking him. The architect, the master of his own beautiful home, had just been handed his official job description. He was the help. The feeling of the glossy paper sticking to his palm was the physical embodiment of his shame. The violation went beyond the shopping trip. I later learned that Patty had walked into his studio, a space Simone herself treated as sacrosanct, and, without asking, used his imported drafting paper for her grocery list. She'd peeled the first sheet off his perfectly stacked drawing pad and scribbled down her demands. It was a physical and symbolic attack on his art. When I finally called him that night, he didn't even mention the money. He just kept repeating, "She used the good paper, Mom. The $70 roll. For gumbo." I realized then that the occupation was spiritual, not just spatial. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank. The full quantifiable cost of the Powell clan's parasitic invasion arrived, as it so often does, in a series of thin, innocuous-looking envelopes delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. Andre had always been meticulous about his finances, a belief that a well-managed budget was the foundation of a well-managed life. That system was now utterly broken. He called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice was a dead, lifeless monotone that scared me more than any shout would have. "Mom," he said, the word barely a rasp. "I think you need to see this." I drove out the next morning. I didn't find him in his studio or on his porch. I found him at the massive oak dining table, the same table where he and Simone had once laughed and planned their future. It was now covered in a sea of white paper, bills, dozens of them. He looked up as I entered, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, a prisoner awaiting sentence. "Look," he said, pushing a piece of paper across the table towards me. It was the electricity bill. I remembered the predictable, manageable sum from when they had first moved in. This one was nearly 3 times that amount. "Darnell," Andre explained, his voice devoid of emotion. He moved the big 70-inch television into his room, leaves it on all night, says he can't sleep without the noise. And Patty, she runs the dishwasher 3 times a day for a single plate and a coffee cup. The sheer, pointless waste made my blood hum with a suppressed rage. He pushed another bill towards me. The water bill. It, too, had tripled. "Patty takes 3, maybe 4 baths a day," he said. "Says it's for her nerves. And Darnell likes to wash the SUV every morning. My SUV." Andre paused, running a hand across his forehead. "There's also a late notice for the HOA fee. They held a party by the pool and damaged the perimeter fence. The repair fine is $1,500. He spoke of this financial ruin as if reciting the weather forecast. The most damning evidence, however, was not the utilities or the HOA fine. It was the credit card statement. This was a joint card Simone had for household expenses, one she had given her mother access to with a small limit for emergencies only. The statement was 8 pages long. I picked it up, my hands suddenly feeling cold. The charges were a litany of shameless, unrestrained consumerism. Amazon, Best Buy, Zappos, Nordstrom. There were charges for a new top-of-the-line gaming console, the 70-inch television, multiple pairs of expensive sneakers, designer handbags, a new wardrobe of clothes for Patty. The total was staggering. They had not just exceeded the small limit. They had maxed out the card and incurred a series of over-limit fees. The balance was well into the 5-figure range. This was not a family in need. This was a calculated, systematic looting. They were treating my son's home and his finances as an open vault, a limitless resource to be plundered for their own selfish materialistic desires. I put the card statement down. It landed with a soft thud on the pile of bills, the sound like a gavel strike. "I don't understand," Andre whispered, shaking his head in dazed disbelief. How could they do this? How could she let them do this? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that was deeper than any financial loss. It was the pain of a profound, intimate betrayal. He had opened his home, his heart, his life to his wife's family, and they in return had treated him not as a son, but as a mark. They weren't just running up bills. They were bankrupting his trust and the very foundation of his marriage. "Andre," I said, my voice low, "where is Simone?" He pointed vaguely toward the hall. "She's avoiding it. Said she has a headache." That single avoidance spoke volumes. The thief was one thing. The enabler was the true threat. I knew then that the next fight was not with the freeloaders, but with the woman who had opened the gate for them. The discovery of the bills was the breaking point. The quiet, non-confrontational man I had raised was finally pushed past the edge of his gentle nature. That evening, after the Powells had retired to their respective rooms to enjoy their newly acquired electronics, Andre knew he had to speak to his wife. He had to try to make her see. He waited for Simone in their bedroom, the credit card statement clutched in his hand like a piece of damning evidence. He told me about the conversation later, his voice heavy with the memory of its failure. He had tried to be calm, to be rational. He laid the bills out on the bed, not as an accusation, but as a problem they needed to solve together. "Simone," he began, his voice quiet, "we need to talk about this. The spending it's out of control. We can't sustain this." Simone looked at the bills, and her immediate reaction was not concern, but a flash of defensive anger. "They're my family, Andre," she said, her voice sharp. "They're just getting settled. They need things." "They need a 70-inch television and $400 sneakers?" Andre asked, his voice beginning to rise despite his best efforts. "Simone, this is thousands of dollars. We have a budget. We have plans. We were saving for the studio." "And we'll still build the studio," she insisted, her voice taking on a high, wounded tone. It's going to take a little longer. That's all. You have to understand, Andre. My mother, my brother, they've never had anything nice in their entire lives. They see what we have, this beautiful house, all this stuff. Can you blame them for wanting a little piece of it? For wanting to feel comfortable?" Her words were a masterclass in deflection, reframing their shameless greed as a kind of pitiable, understandable desire. She was painting them as victims of circumstance, and him, by extension, as the ungenerous, stingy villain. The gaslighting was masterful, I thought, listening to my son recount the exchange. She was using his kindness as a weapon. "Comfortable?" Andre's voice finally broke, the frustration pouring out of him. "Simone, I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable being treated like a servant in my own home. I'm not comfortable having my car used as a free taxi service. This isn't about generosity. This is about respect, and they have shown me none." He was pleading with her, begging her to see the situation from his perspective, to stand with him against the invasion. But Simone's loyalty was a tangled, complicated thing. She saw their behavior not as an act of disrespect towards her husband, but as a validation of her own success. To criticize them was to criticize her own choices. "You're exaggerating," she said, her voice cold. "Your family is messy. You need to be a little more patient, a little more understanding. This isn't permanent." The conversation, the one that was supposed to be a turning point, was a dead end. Simone had made her choice. She had chosen her parasitic, manipulative family over the well-being of her husband. Andre told me he had slept in the guest room that night, the only room the Powells hadn't claimed. He felt utterly alone, trapped in his own marriage. He was a man being crushed slowly and systematically, and the foundation of his life was cracking beneath his feet. When I hung up the phone, I knew the time for gentle suggestion was over. This required a builder's immediate intervention. The next move I made would not be on their balance sheet, but on the deed to the house itself. The stalemate with Simone was a luxury Andre and I could not afford. The problems spilling out of the country house were no longer confined to its interior. They were becoming visible, external threats. 2 days after my last visit, a certified letter arrived at Andre's office, addressed from the Hillside County Homeowners Association. It wasn't a friendly reminder. It was a formal notice of violation, and it escalated the stakes from a private marital dispute to a public financial problem. The letter cited 3 code violations. First, the trash accumulation. Patty and Darnell, too lazy to learn the county's complicated recycling schedule, had simply piled everything: beer bottles, pizza boxes, the wrappers from countless fast food runs, next to the main gate. The association threatened a daily fine until the heap was removed. Second, the pool. Darnell's constant lounging had turned the meticulously maintained pool into a health hazard. The letter included a photograph of the murky water and threatened an injunction against the property if the maintenance wasn't professionally addressed within 48 hours. But the third violation was the most personal: unapproved commercial activity. Andre had installed reinforced beams in the old barn out back, envisioning the architectural studio he'd always dreamed of. The Powells, however, had turned the barn into a haphazard, visible storage unit for their new purchases, especially the oversized boxes from the 70-inch television and the gaming console. The HOA saw the influx of large delivery trucks and the discarded packaging as a breach of residential zoning. They demanded an immediate cease and desist, or they would place a lien on the property. A lien on my house. I called Andre immediately. The HOA is threatening to close down your studio space before you even open it, I said, keeping my voice level. Andre exhaled slowly, a long, weary sound. I saw the letter. I was going to handle it. I've already called the maintenance guy for the pool. And the trash? And the lien? I asked Darnell to move the boxes. He told me he was too busy finding himself and to hire someone. He paused. Simone said I'm overreacting. She says the HOA is just being petty. That sentence snapped my focus. Simone was actively protecting the source of the problem. Andre, I said, my voice hardening, this is not petty. This is the foundation of your future. We built this house on clear legal ground. Patty and Darnell are now polluting that ground. They are threatening the very deed. My own reputation, the one I'd built over a lifetime of construction integrity, was now tied to the slovenly behavior of Patty Powell and her son. The thought of a Washington Crest property having a code violation and a potential lien was a sharp, visceral pain. I knew then that Andre, the gentle soul who valued peace, was structurally incapable of fighting this battle. I had built the fortress. Now I had to defend it. I need you to send me the full deed and the HOA agreement right now, I commanded. I'm getting a lawyer involved, Andre. Not for the eviction yet, but for the property rights. I need to know exactly what legal tools I have to flush the system. He hesitated. A lawyer, Mom? Simone will see that as a declaration of war. She made the declaration when she chose a $400 pair of sneakers for Darnell over your peace of mind, I retorted. We are moving from private betrayal to legal strategy. You stay put. I'm going to my lawyer, Martin. This is no longer your battle to fight alone. I hung up and felt the familiar surge of a CEO taking command of a failing project. I would treat Patty Powell like a hostile environmental hazard and Darnell like an unauthorized subcontractor. I drove straight to the city, the paperwork already forwarded to my tablet. The first step in any structural repair is finding the weakest beam. In this case, it was the specific, easily violated rules of the homeowners association. I would use the system they hated to flush them out. I walked into Martin's office, feeling the hard diamond point of my resolve sharpen. The house is not just a gift, I thought. It's a conditional contract, and the conditions are about to be enforced. The consultation with Martin, my lawyer, was both clarifying and frustrating. The deed was clean, but since the house was legally Andre and Simone's primary residence, I couldn't simply evict them. I needed to prove financial damage and hostile, persistent nuisance to the property and the owners, Andre. That meant I couldn't just throw Patty and Darnell out yet. I needed definitive, visible evidence of their parasitism, and I needed to get it in person. I drove back to the country house that afternoon, unannounced. My intent was not to argue, but to gather data. The house felt thick and stagnant, with the clawing atmosphere of sloth and entitlement. My first observation was the living room. Darnell was sprawled across the sofa, his bare feet propped up on a silk cushion Simone had treasured. He was staring slack-jawed at the 70-inch television that was blasting a reality show. Near him, half a dozen empty glasses and a greasy pizza box sat open on the floor. I stood directly between Darnell and the screen, blocking his view. He barely moved. "Yo, you're in the way," he mumbled, his dull eyes trying to find the screen around me. I didn't acknowledge him. I scanned the room. On a side table next to a stack of wet towels was a cardboard box marked Best Buy, containing the top-of-the-line gaming console from the credit card statement. I took a mental note. Prop A, console, value over $1,000, purchased with stolen funds. I proceeded to the kitchen. Patty Powell was standing by the state-of-the-art blender I had bought for them as a wedding gift, holding her phone to her ear. "The service around here has really gone downhill," she whined into the receiver. "I've been waiting for my kale and mango smoothie for 20 minutes. She saw me, and her expression instantly shifted to syrupy false delight. "Lorraine, what a treat! You're just in time to see if you can figure out this complicated new blender for me. My poor nerves are just shot today." She immediately tried to press me into the same role of service she had assigned my son. "I'm not here to make smoothies, Patty," I said, my voice low and calm. I didn't raise it. I didn't change my tone. "I'm here about the bills." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, those things. Andre is so dramatic. You know how men are. He needs to relax. It's just money." "It's money you spent on my son's credit card," I corrected. "You ran up a balance well into the 5-figure range." "That's not just money. That's theft." Patty's mask finally cracked. Her face turned cold. "It was an emergency," she snapped. "My family needed nice things. My daughter is married to a man who owns this palace. We deserve to feel comfortable, too." "Comfort is earned," I countered. "Greed is criminal." "Where is the rest of your luggage?" I asked, pivoting instantly. She blinked, confused. "What luggage? We're guests." "The luggage you brought for your couple of weeks," I pressed. "The sheer volume indicates you never intended to leave. I want to see the items purchased on Andre's maxed-out card." This sudden, aggressive demand for inventory caught her completely off guard. Patty sputtered, trying to maintain her theatrical outrage, but the shift from money to possession triggered a deeper fear. She lunged forward, trying to block my path toward the guest bedrooms. "You can't go in there! That's private!" she shrieked. I didn't stop. I simply walked past her, my movement calm and deliberate, heading straight for the staircase. I needed to see the full scope of the looting, and I needed Patty to realize that the rules had changed. I was now the building inspector, and the occupancy permit was about to be revoked. I didn't have to enter the bedrooms. Patty's panic confirmed everything. She scrambled in front of me, shouting, "Simone! Simone! Your mother-in-law is losing her mind. She's violating our privacy." Her distress was no longer theatrical. It was the raw, ugly fear of a thief caught with the goods. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking down at her. "The property deed allows the builder, that's me, full access for maintenance and inspection for the first 5 years." I lied easily, adding a crucial layer of legal fiction to my authority. "Your possessions are incidental. The integrity of the foundation is not." I reached into my pocket, pulling out a small, printed notice. It was a mock-up of an official HOA letter. The HOA has placed a preliminary lien on the property due to unmanaged waste and visible neglect. If the source of the nuisance, the unauthorized persons and their belongings, are not removed by noon tomorrow, the lien becomes permanent. Patty's jaw dropped. The word lien hit her like a punch. "That's a lie! Simone!" Upstairs, Simone was no longer hiding. She was standing on the landing, having heard the chaos. Her face was a mask of frantic desperation. She ran down the last few steps, stopping between Patty and me. "Lorraine, please," Simone begged, her voice a high, panicked whine. "What are you doing? This is going too far. You can't threaten them with the HOA." "It's not a threat, Simone. It's a consequence," I stated, my voice flat. "Your mother maxed out Andre's credit card and spent the money on a wardrobe and electronics, which are currently being stored in your guest bedrooms. Darnell has incurred thousands in fines that you and Andre must pay. The HOA is the least of your problems." Simone looked at me, then back at her mother, who was now tearful and attempting the victim role again. Patty cried, "Don't listen to her, baby. She's trying to throw us out. You'll never see us again." That line was the crucial pivot. "She's right, Simone," I said. "This family is a liability. Your mother's entitlement has created a debt that will take Andre a year to pay off. We either clean the system now, or the system crashes. Your choice." Simone turned to her mother. "Mama, what did you buy? Did you really max out the credit card?" The realization was finally breaking through her denial, forced by the immediate threat of a legal penalty. Patty, realizing her enabler was wavering, abandoned tears for aggression. "It's not my fault your husband is a tightwad. He has this huge house he should share. You think you're better than us?" "I think I'm more responsible than you," I cut in, not letting Patty regain control. "Simone, you have 1 hour to choose who you stand with. Your husband and the life you built, or the parasites that are tearing it down." I walked past her, reaching the main door. If they are not packed and waiting outside, by the time I return, I will file for an emergency hearing based on proven financial duress and property nuisance. I closed the door behind me with a decisive snap. I didn't get in my truck. I walked to the edge of the porch, sat on the steps, and pulled out my phone. I called Martin. "The HOA lien was a bluff," I told him, keeping my voice low. "But it worked. Patty confirmed the card use and the intent to stay. I gave Simone an hour ultimatum. Get me the paperwork for a formal notice of termination of access and guest status right now. I need something real to hand them when I go back inside. Time to convert the bluff into hard leverage." The clock was ticking, not for the eviction, but for Simone's marriage. I gave them exactly 40 minutes. When I walked back up the long, grand steps of the porch, I wasn't carrying a piece of paper. I was carrying the magnificent Japanese maple tree I had bought, a rare lace leaf variety, its crimson leaves a fiery red. It was a symbol of strength, of putting down roots. I saw Andre sitting alone on the steps, staring at the ground, his shoulders slumped in a posture of profound, soul-deep exhaustion. My blood, which had been simmering at a low boil for weeks, flashed into a hot, white-hot rage. This was no longer a marital dispute. This was an assault on my child. I set the tree down hard on the gravel. This was no longer a day for planting trees. This was a day for pulling weeds. You stay here, I said to Andre. My voice as calm and as final as a judge's gavel. I'll handle this. I walked through the front door. The noise level was deafening. Darnell was still watching the 70-inch television, the volume impossibly high. Patty was shrieking somewhere upstairs. Simone was nowhere to be seen. I walked into the living room, picked up the remote control from the coffee table, and pressed the power button. The screen went black, plunging the room into an abrupt, shocking silence. Darnell finally sat up, a flicker of genuine anger in his dull eyes. "Hey, what's the big idea? I was watching that," he shouted. I looked down at him. My face was a blank, unreadable mask. "Darnell," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the silence like a diamond blade. "Get your things. You're leaving." He stared, stunned into momentary paralysis. I didn't wait for his response. I walked back towards the kitchen where Patty was now emerging, her face red with confused indignation. "The TV just," she began, her voice a rising whine. I cut her off. "Patsy," I said, meeting her gaze, "pack your bags. You have 5 minutes." I activated a microclock, forcing immediate action. The authority in my voice was the deep, foundational authority of a woman who has signed payroll checks for hundreds of men. Patty's mask of syrupy sweetness fell away, revealing the raw, ugly face of her entitlement. "Who do you think you are talking to me like that in my daughter's home?" she sputtered. "That is where you are mistaken," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "This is not your daughter's home, and you are no longer a guest here." Chaos exploded. Darnell came storming out of the living room, his face red with impotent rage. "You can't just kick me out. I'm a guest here," he bellowed. "Your status has been revoked," I said, my voice flat, my eyes on my watch. "You have 3 minutes." Patty screamed for Simone. Simone came flying down the stairs, her face a mask of frantic desperation. She ran to me, her hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "Lorraine, please. What are you doing? You can't do this. They're my family." This was the critical moment, the test of her allegiance. I simply stepped aside, revealing my son, Andre, who had followed me inside and was now standing silently, powerfully at my back. He did not speak. He just stood there, his arms crossed, his face a hard, unyielding mask. He had made his choice. He was standing with me. The sight of her husband, no longer a defeated servant, but a silent, solid wall of opposition, stunned Simone into silence. The fight went out of the Powell clan. Their blustering was predicated on the belief that Andre would never stand up to them, and that Simone would always take their side. Faced with this united front, their power evaporated. The anger and indignation were instantly replaced by a frantic, undignified scramble. They ran to their respective rooms, the sound of drawers being thrown open and closets ransacked echoing through the house. They were no longer concerned with their rights as guests. They were concerned with grabbing the trove of electronics and designer clothes they had acquired during their month-long looting spree. I stood at the foot of the stairs, my eyes on my watch. 1 minute, I called out, my voice calm and clear. They came stumbling down the stairs, their arms laden with bags, their faces a mixture of fury and humiliation. They did not look at me. They did not look at Andre. They scuttled past us like rats, fleeing a flooding ship, and burst out the front door. I followed them, my son and daughter-in-law, trailing silently behind me. The scene on the driveway was a tableau of defeated entitlement. Patty and Darnell stood amidst a chaotic pile of their hastily packed luggage and the mountain of shopping bags that represented their month-long spree. Their luxury resort vacation had come to an abrupt, undignified end. Darnell, ever the picture of impotent rage, kicked one of his own suitcases. "I'm going to sue. This is like illegal eviction or something," he yelled. Patti had switched tactics to a low, venomous muttering. "After everything we've done for her," she hissed, glaring at the house. "Ungrateful. Wait till her friends hear about this." I stood on the porch, my arms crossed, a silent, immovable sentinel. Andre stood beside me, his presence a quiet, solid affirmation of my actions. The occupiers had been repelled, but there was one final casualty to be dealt with. Simone. She stood in the open doorway, her body literally caught between two worlds. On the porch was her husband, her home, the life of peace and security she had chosen. On the driveway was her family, her past, the chaotic, parasitic loyalty she could not seem to escape. "You can't just leave them there," she cried, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and despair. "Where are they supposed to go?" "That is no longer your husband's problem to solve," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Nor is it mine. They are your family, and you have a choice to make." The full, terrible weight of that choice finally seemed to dawn on her. She looked from my face to Andre's, and then back to the two pathetic figures on the driveway. "You're being cruel, Lorraine," she finally whispered, her voice a ragged, desperate plea. "You can't make me choose between my husband and my mother." "I'm not making you choose," I replied, my voice as calm and as cold as the coming evening air. "You made your choice a month ago. You chose to allow your family to disrespect your husband. You chose to defend their greed over his peace of mind. This is not a choice. This is a consequence." From my pocket, I took out a small black remote. I had installed the automatic gate at the end of the long driveway myself, a final touch to ensure the privacy and security of the estate. I pressed the button. Far down the driveway, the two halves of the heavy wrought iron gate began to swing shut with a quiet, inexorable hum. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a final physical severing. Patti and Darnell saw it. A new wave of panic washed over their faces. They were not just being asked to leave. They were being locked out permanently. Simone saw it too. The closing gate was a finish line she was on the wrong side of. "No!" she gasped, taking a step forward. "Lorraine, don't!" The gate continued its slow, steady journey. "This is my home too," she cried again. "You can't lock me out of my own life." I looked her dead in the eye. The gate was almost closed now, the space between the two halves just a sliver. I waited for the final soft clang as the magnetic lock engaged. That sound of absolute finality echoed up the driveway. The perimeter was secure. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had so catastrophically failed to understand the nature of the gift she had been given. I delivered the final, devastating verdict, the summation of the entire sorry affair. The truth boiled down to its three most brutal, most undeniable words. "This isn't yours." The words landed not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating force of a wrecking ball. The house wasn't hers. It was a gift to my son. The security wasn't hers. It was a product of a lifetime of my hard work. The legacy was something she had been invited to share, not to desecrate. The defiance, the last vestiges of her misplaced loyalty, all of it crumbled under the weight of those three words. She let out a small wounded sound and sank to her knees in the doorway, her face in her hands. I turned to my son. The weary, defeated man I had found on these steps just an hour ago was gone. In his place was a man who had been reminded of his own worth, of his own power. "I'm going to go pack a bag, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need some space. I'll stay with you for a few days." "No," I said, putting a hand on his arm. "You're not. This is your house. You're not going to be driven out of it again." I looked pointedly at the sobbing figure of his wife. This is your house. This is your marriage. She is your wife. You need to tell her how you feel. She needs to hear it from you. I had cleared the battlefield for him. It was now up to him to fight for his own peace. A new resolve hardened in his eyes. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He walked over to Simone and knelt beside her. Simone, he began, and his voice was not the quiet, gentle murmur she was used to. It was the voice of a man who had finally found his edge. Look at me. Slowly she raised her head, her face a mess of tears and shame. For a month, he said, his voice unwavering. I have felt like a ghost in my own home. I have been disrespected. I have been used, and I have been ignored. And when I came to you, when I begged you to see what was happening, you chose them. You chose their comfort over my peace. You chose their greed over our future. Every word was a clean, surgical cut, laying bare the truth of her betrayal. I love you, Simone, but I cannot live like this. My mother is right. We either build our life on this foundation together, you and me, or we don't. But there is no room in this marriage for them. Not anymore. Not ever again. He stood up, leaving the final, absolute choice in her hands. He had reclaimed his power. Simone looked at her husband, truly seeing him for the first time in weeks. She saw the pain in his eyes, the strength in his posture, the absolute finality in his words. You, she whispered, her voice a broken, pleading sound. I choose you, Andre. I'm so sorry. I choose you. The reckoning was complete. The long, painful process of rebuilding could now begin. A month later, I drove out to the country house again. This time, I was not on a rescue mission. I was an invited guest for Sunday dinner. The Japanese maple tree I had brought on that terrible day was now planted in the front yard. Its fiery red leaves were a vibrant, beautiful scar, a reminder of the battle that had been fought and won. The house, when I walked in, was filled with the familiar, welcoming silence. It was the peaceful, productive silence I remembered from the beginning. The scent of roasting chicken filled the air. There were no televisions blaring, no messes on the floor, no lingering sense of tension. It was a sanctuary once more. I found Andre in the barn, his new studio. His drafting table was set up in the center, bathed in the light from the large barn doors he had thrown open to the autumn afternoon. He was bent over a set of blueprints, a pencil behind his ear, a look of serene, focused concentration on his face. He was home. Mom, he said, looking up with a genuine, relaxed smile that reached his eyes. He told me he and Simone were in counseling. It was hard, he said. There was a lot of trust to rebuild, but for the first time, she was really listening. She was facing the hard truths about her family and her own enabling behavior. She had cut off all contact with her mother and brother. A painful but necessary amputation. They were, he said for the first time, a real team. Simone, when she came out to call us in for dinner, was different too. The defensive, brittle energy was gone. She was quieter, more thoughtful. She looked me in the eye, her gaze filled with a humility I had never seen in her before. Lorraine, she said, her voice soft. Thank you for coming. It means a lot to us. The gratitude was real, the respect was earned. Before I left, as the evening sun was setting, I handed Andre a thick manila envelope. Inside were all the bills from the month of the invasion, the tripled utility statements, the 8-page credit card bill. Each one was stamped in bold red ink with 2 words, paid in full. Andre looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. Mom, you didn't have to do this. Yes, I did, I said, putting a hand on his arm. I looked from him to the house, to the new tree putting down its roots in the rich soil. Every house I build, every project worth a damn has to start with a clean foundation. No outstanding debts, no lingering obligations. He looked at the paid bills and understood my meaning. The words were not just about money, they were about the future. The slate had been wiped clean. The financial cost of Simone's mistake had been paid. The emotional cost was something they would have to continue to work on, but now they could do it without the weight of the past dragging them down. The house was his. The marriage was his. The future was theirs to build. And this time, I knew with a deep and abiding certainty that the foundation was strong enough to last a lifetime. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.